안녕하세요. 원서 읽는 고양이입니다. 해리포터 1권 챕터 7 The Sorting Hat 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone Chapter 7 The Sorting Hat The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robe stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. "The bird's ears, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you couldn't fit the whole of the visitor's house in it. The stone walls so big with flaming torches like the ones in Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and the magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagstone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from the doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here, but Professor McGonagall showed first years into a small, empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closer together, and they would usually have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start-up-tone banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seat in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses." The sorting is a very important ceremony because while you're here, house will be something like if your family in Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The four houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you're at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn you house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house will be most points already with the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will make a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in the first of the last of the school. I just said you're smarting yourselves off as much as you can while you're waiting. Her eyes lingered from the moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and on Ron's smooth nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when we're ready for you," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly." She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly sorted into houses?" he asked Ron. "Some sort of test, I think. Fred said a horse of luck, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test? In front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth we have to do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. They looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger. She was whispering very fast about all the spells she learned, and wondering which one she needed. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous, never, not even when he had to take a school report home to the Dursleys, saying that he somehow turned his teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall will come back and lead him into his room. When something happened made him jump about a foot in the air, several people behind him screamed. "What the?" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed to the back wall. Pearly white and slightly transparent, they glided across the room, cooking to one another and hurriedly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give a second chance." "My dear Friar, haven't we given Pips all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name when you know he's not really even a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "New students," said the fat friar, smiling about at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded weakly. "Hope is in the Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My own house, you know." "Move along now," said the first short voice. "The sorting ceremony about to start." Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. "Now, from a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs turned to lead, Harry got into the line behind the boy's sandy hair with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the great hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in mid-air over 4 long tables where the lives of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so that it came to a halt like flying facing the other students with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like a pair of lanterns with flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone misty silver. Mainly to the boys staring light, Harry looked upward and saw the velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whispered, "Its spirits look like a sky outside. I will read about it in Hogwarts history." It was hard to believe there was a ceiling there, a hall. The great hall didn't simply open onto the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again and saw Professor McGonagall silently place a 4-legged stool in front of first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and faced extremely dirty, and Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they had to try with a rabbit out of it. Harry thought wildly that simple sort of thing, noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat. He stared at it too. For a few seconds there was impertinent silence, and the hat twitched. A whiff filled the room, opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge as you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your Verizon black, your top hat snake and hole. For I'm the working sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your hat, in the sorting hat sea. So try me on, and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, dwell the brave at heart. The daring nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, they're just and loyal. There's patient Hufflepuff but true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you haven't read in mind, with theirs of wit and learning, they only find their kind. Or perhaps at Slytherin, you'll make your real friends, those cunning folk or any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flat. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm the thinking cap. The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished his song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables and became quite still again. So we've just to try the hat, Ron whispered to Harry. I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled vaguely. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do the spell, but he did wish they could try them on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quickly witted or any of them at the moment. If they only had met ancient or hospital people who were the crazy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long roll of parchment. When they call your name, you will put in the hat and sit on the stool will be sorted. And Hannah. A pink-faced girl with brown pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which waved fat outline over his eyes, and sat down. A moment's pause. Hufflepuff, shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. Bon Susan! Hufflepuff, shouted the hare again, and the Susan scuttled off to sit next to Hannah. Boot Terry! Ravenclaw! The table second from the left clapped this time. 7 Ravenclaws shook hands with Harry as he joined them. Roll called Mandy with Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers cackling. Bolster and Millicent Mandy came with Slytherin. Where's your nation? After all he had heard about Slytherin, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. He was trying to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during gym at his old school. He has always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Flinchily, Justin. Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed the head shouted up the house at once, but on others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in the line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the head declared him in Gryffindor. Granger Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the school and jammed the hat legally on her head. Gryffindor, shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said there had obviously been a mistake and he better get over the chain? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. Thus hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted, Gryffindor! The Neville was thus still wearing it. I had to jog back and made gaze of laughter to give it to McDougal Rat. Malfoy staggered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The head-after very treasure strain is screamed, Slytherin! Malfoy went to join his friends, Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with themselves. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Maud, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, then Perks, Sally Ann, and then, at last, Potter Harry. As Harry stepped forward, the whisper suddenly broke out like little hissing fires all over the hall. Potter? Did she say? The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next seconds, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. There's talent. Oh my goodness, yes. It is night first. Prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So, where should I put you? Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, Not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, eh? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. No doubt about that. No? Well, if we're sure, better be Gryffindor. Harry heard the hat shout the last word to the whole hall. He took up his hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not been put in Slytherin. He hardly knew it was the loudest cheer yet. Percy the Prefect got up and shook his hand vigorously while the Weasley twins said, "We got Potter! We got Potter!" Harry sat down opposite of the ghost and Ralph had seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry the sudden horrible feeling he just punched it with a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table perfectly now. At the end nearest himself, Hagrid, he caught his eyes and gave him the thumbs up. Harry grinned back. And there, in the center of the high table, in the large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card he had gotten out of the chocolate frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole world that shone as brightly as the ghost. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the leaky cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. Now there are only 4 people left to be sorted. Thomas Dean, a black boy even taller than Ron, joined Harry at the Gryffindor table. Turpin Lisa became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green now. Gryffindor! Harry clapped loudly with the last as Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. "Well done, Ron, excellent," said Percy Weasley purposely across Harry as the beanie blaze was made of Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up his skull and dipped the story head away. At the empty cooked plate, he had only just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin was ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the student. Professor McGonagall rolled up his scroll and did the soaring head away. Harry looked down at his own big golden plate. He had only just realized how hungry he was. Pumpkin pasties seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students. His arm opened wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to the new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin the banquet, I would like to say a few words." And here they were, Nitwit Blubber, Voldemort, Twig. "Thank you." He sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. Is he been mad? He asked for certainly. Mad? Said Percy merrily. He's genius. Best wizard in the world. But he's a bit mad, yes. Potato celery? Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of him were now piled up with foods. He had never seen so many things. He liked to eat on one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, and round chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs. Their Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry. He'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything, except for the peppermints, and began to eat. It was all delicious. That does look good, said the ghost in the roof sadly, watching Harry cut up his steak. Can't you? I haven't eaten for every 500 years, said the ghost. I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've been to introduce myself. Sir Nicholas Mimsy Polfinton at your service. Resident Ghost of Gryffindor Tower. I know who you are, said Ron suddenly. My brothers told me about you. You're nearly Headless Nick. I will prefer to Sir Nicholas Mimsy, the voice very sniffly. The sandy hair assumed a twist again and erupted. Nearly headless? How can you be near headless? Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if their little chap wasn't going to all the way he wanted. Like this, he said irritably, with his left ear and pulled. His whole head swung up his neck and fell onto his shoulder as if it was on a hinge. Someone had obviously tried to behead them, but not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned looks on their faces, Nearly Headless Nick rubbed his head in his neck and coughed and said, So, new Gryffindors. I hope you're going to have the Gryffindor Championship this year. Gryffindors have never gone so long with the winning. Slytherins have got the 6 years in a row. The bloody bear's becoming almost unbearable. His Slytherin ghost. Harry looked over at the Slytherin table and saw a horrible ghost sitting there with blank staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robe stained with silver blood. It was Red Nick the Mindful who, Harry was pleased to see, didn't look too pleased with the sitting in management. How did it go covered in blood? asked Seamus in great interest. I've never asked, said Nearly Headless Nick hurriedly. When everyone had eaten as much as they could, her remains of food faded from the face, leaving them sparkling clean as before. A moment later, the desserts appeared. Blocks of ice cream and every flavor you could think of. Apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, jam donuts, trifle strawberries, jello, rice pudding. As Harry had decided for treacle heart, the talk turned to the families. "I've had enough," says Seamus. "My dad's Muggle." Mom didn't tell me she was a witch till after they were married. Very nasty shock for him. The others laughed. "What about you, Neville?" said Ron. "Well, my grandpa told me and she's a witch," said Neville. "But the family thought I was all Muggle for ages. My great-uncle Vernon kept trying to catch me off my guard and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off the end of Blackpool Pipe once. I nearly drowned. Nothing happened. It was 8. Great-uncle Elkie came from the dinner, and he was hanging me out of the upstairs window by the ankles when my grand-auntie Annette offered him a leg, and I accidentally let go. But I bounced all the way down the garden and into the road. They were all really pleased. Jane was fine. She was so happy. And you should have said the verses when I got in here. They thought I might not be magic enough to come, you see. Great Uncle Aki was so pleased they bought me my toad." On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione were talking about lessons. "I do hope they serve right away. There's so much to learn. I'm particularly interested in relation, turning something to something else. Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. You'll be starting small, just magics in the middles, and that sort of thing." Harry, who was starting to feel warm and sleepy, looked up at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell, in his absurd turban, was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair and hooked nose and sallow skin. It happened very suddenly. The hook-nosed teacher looked past Tur's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp pain shot across the scar on Harry's forehead. "Ouch!" Harry clapped a hand into his head. "What is it?" asked Percy. Nothing,"